I'm really glad Danny and Laura set me up correctly. So thank you for that. They didn't know. A lot of what we do is human-centered tech work. Some of it is on the bleeding edge. And a lot of it is in persuading large companies to move. The Economist was kind enough to say good things about us, especially because we started the company around the same time that Cambridge Analytica was dying. So it was nice to be an AI company that was spoken well of. What we try and do is a fairly noble premise, and we're probably, 1/10 of 1/100th of a percent on the way there. The construct is of there being no more strangers today compared to 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And that's because the internet today is home to 5 billion people and counting and adding, which explains a lot of the cool stats that Danny was showing around just the sheer volume of conversations that happen online and digitally. Now, that's the beautiful part, that the internet allows us to connect, talk, chat, but our homes are now invaded by impressions. And this has been the downside, or the greatest brains of our generation are dedicated to getting you to do just one more click on something. That pesky banner, that silly thing in your news feed, those are the things that millions of highly qualified, highly sophisticated engineers are aiming for you and me to do right. So there's this abuse that's happening of the home in some shape or form, and not to pick on Facebook unfairly, but here you go, right? This is just a snapshot of random stuff that's on my feed. None of which I asked for, to be honest. And I believe when people talk about AI and tech taking over the world, I don't worry. I don't worry because for two reasons. One is if we can't start on Wi-Fi half the time, we shouldn't worry about AI and tech and digital leadership. And second, if the best minds in the world can't get their algo to speak to me in an intuitive, humanistic way, then I'm not fussed about where the world is going to end. So there's a big journey to be made, and right now the internet is treated as a way to just drop petabytes of information on these 5 billion people on a daily basis. And as we speak with clients, part of our mission is, how do you do this more humanely, more sensibly, and take away the visual abuse that comes to us on a daily basis. There is hope. Like Iron Man, there are some cool companies that put human data at their heart. And despite the cyborgy thing going on here, that fundamentally he's a good guy behind all the chatter that he engages in. I picked a few examples. I did not know Twitter was going to be on, but I'm glad I'm able to score some points. The BBC by itself is a good enough organization. But what's interesting here is not that it's Insta or Netflix or Amazon or Twitter. What's interesting is that each of these companies, Blockbuster, Kodak, Radio Shack, and even the BBC, have had multiple opportunities where they've seen the future coming, and they've seen that future being dictated to by humans in a certain way, and they didn't adhere to it. Laura obviously uses Steve Jobs' example, and Steve's clearly a visionary, but he's also very stubborn, right? Or was very stubborn, and that's an anomaly to use. There was an interesting podcast I was listening to yesterday, and Michael Siebel, one of the partners at Y Combinator, was talking about how everybody sees the Steve Jobs story, right? But the truth is, someone like Y Combinator gets 30,000 applications a year, and they choose about 1% of those people. And then about the top 10% of that 1% gets funded. And then 1% of that top 10% becomes unicorn. So we've got this media bias that you start up and you get funded and you're going to be unicorn, which is epic. But digital leadership doesn't come from that. It comes from the hundreds and thousands of small companies like us who will probably never be a unicorn of any consequence. But there are snippets you're taking out and building as you build out. A large part of our mission is around using data and tech to create leadership of a different kind. So having done a couple of these before, it's fascinating to see how you can actually get funded for making juicers or a silly app, and that was my first venture. And less and less gets funded towards bigger, purpose-built, human-centered things. So with this venture at Quilt, the intent is how do we stitch up the internet from a human perspective. And there's a reason to stitch it up, because if you watch the Biden-Trump debate a few hours ago, you'll realize there's a bit of controversy in the world and different viewpoints. And I won't get political on this and pick one side over the other, but you realize there's fragments of us as humans. And the internet allows us, for once, right, not to have siloed opinions that can't be shared, and not to have conversations that can't be had, and not to devolve and be in disparate groups, but how do you bring this all together? And that's what we're trying to do in a very small way at Quilt, because human understanding should not be used only for ads. If the best use case that a technology can be done is to put something in my news feed to make me buy more stuff, that kind of defeats the purpose, right, in some shape or form. So what we do, this is the grand reveal into how we're nicer people, but there's two segments to us as a business. One is around servicing large organizations and helping them do more with data. We've had the good fortune of working with Danny's organization in understanding Twitter data better, and there was a piece I think we supported them on around the joy that exists on Twitter. Now, if I told anybody on this outside the Twitter guys that, guys, Twitter's actually okay, and like, no, did you know about all the Twitter trolls and the amount of hate that exists? And that's a piece of it, right? And that's not Twitter's fault or AI's fault or even Facebook's fault to a certain extent. That's just how we operate in a certain shape and form. So our piece is like, can you make a more human connection than just drop an ad? How do I make Laura informed, knowledgeable about a product that she wants to buy? I'm speaking on you because I see you on the screen there. And the other half of the business works in the reverse. It works with people who don't believe that the internet is a real thing, who don't believe that the large tech companies can actually inform, change, adapt, and shift humans in a large way. So these are the organizations that have been kind enough to take some serious punts on us. And the work that we do with them sits in these spaces. And I'll talk about each of these in a bit of detail and talk about how the internet can actually be used to lead, especially in Asia, because there will be, and obviously everyone on the phone, on the Zoom call knows this, there is, we've all leapfrogged a bunch, there's much more content consumed here than in the West. So the anti-vaccination project was a fascinating one. For the parents on this call, I'm hoping you vaccinated your kids. But in case you haven't vaccinated your kids, you probably fall into the revolutionary category, right? One of my co-panelists talked about Elon Musk. Now, Elon is probably an anti-vaxxer in some shape or form, right? But people who don't want to vaccinate their children are people who look and talk and feel just like us. They're as educated. Many of them are accountants, attorneys, work at big companies like the ones I just mentioned, but they tend to not agree to vaccinating their children because of a revolutionary zeal. For them, it's almost like the climate crisis. It's about not putting pesticides in my food. It's about shopping at the farmer's market. And because I'm pure, I don't want to put vaccines into my kid. And so you can use, and that allows them to be in a filter bubble and a narrative circle that the algos then reinforce. So if Vicky is consuming a particular kind of content, the algos are going to obviously serve that up repeatedly and narrow your piece down. What we try and do is prick that bubble, right? And drop in a piece of sensible content. Not content which says, hey, you're really silly and unintelligent for not vaccinating your kids, but something that's a little less threatening, a little less overbearing to get them to believe in anti-vax being a bad thing. Moving on to another piece on mental health, one of the things that we do in the company is do moonshots. So this was a project that my co-founder Angad decided to have us work on. We took 88 celebrities and who had committed suicide in the last 2 years. So folks like Anthony Bourdain and lots of other cool people. And we studied their Instagram and Twitter. And what we found was that on language, they didn't go from very happy to very sad and then kill themselves. They went from very happy to very sad, and they came back to flat. And when they were flat, that's when day zero happens, right? And the same thing with photographs. They went from multi-hued photographs, the top photograph tier there, into sepia and black and white. And it's as if, basically life got sucked out of them. Now, you would have cool AI that could intervene at particular moments and, nudge people away. And there's so much nudge behavior conversations going on. Singapore is a great country in terms of having nudge behavior, particularly like the escalators are epic, right? You stand on one side always, and that doesn't change. The minute I land back in Manhattan, I'm like, wow, clearly there's no escalator magic happening here. So that's a piece about how you use tech to drive a better future, tech to drive waste management change, tech to make people believe in climate change. Now, if you had somebody who was vehemently opposed to climate change, you would never get through to them by telling them factually what was wrong. So the Al Gore documentary from 20 years ago, An Inconvenient Truth, was fantastic. It was fact-based, amazing visuals. But it didn't appeal to me for a reason that was close enough to me, right? So so how do you appeal to people? And there are two pieces here on the right. There's a sexual and reproductive health chart, and there's a gender equality chart. And they're both part of the same project. And I'll talk about the gender equality chart first. So the premise, hopefully this is true, that no young boy is born a misogynist, right? So I become a misogynist because I'm exposed to certain things and truths in my filter bubble in reality. So my mom may not work, my sister may not go to school, my dad makes all the decisions. And so in my mind, I grew up thinking like, oh, that's my norm, right, if you will. But you have an opportunity using digital techniques to change the norm, right? So an NGO can go to a village or to 10 villages or to 100 cities and try and change the norm of men being misogynistic. But you could just take over their phones, right? And so the way you take over their phones is you suddenly insert, using ads, right, and community pages, tons of data that allow them to say, oh, I just saw a photo of a woman working. She looks like she's a scientist. How bizarre is that? And then they see somebody working at Twitter, they see somebody working at Unilever, they see somebody who's a politician, who's a bureaucrat, who's a lawyer. And now you've reframed their head in the way that's most intimate to them. When you do that, you change behavior. Now, clearly nobody wanted their girlfriend or sister to be a banker. I can't change that. I don't blame them for that lack of change. But in every other dimension, we are able to move people. And I'll end with the last chart up on the top right, which is how do you get teenagers to practice safe sex? Now, you all have been teenagers at some point in time. It's impossible to tell teenagers, don't have sex. Like that's never going to happen, right? But wear a condom, right? Or be on the pill, or get an IUD, or whatever that metric happens to be. And the way you change that is you again change that with making condom use cool and interesting. And that's how our aim is to take the tools that have already been built by some amazing companies in the world, Chinese and American, and use those tools to nudge humanity into being better versions of ourselves. And our premise is the internet is home. Treat it like one. Don't spam us. Make us do better stuff. And P.S. we are hiring. That's the public service announcement that I have to throw in there. But Katya, back to you.